They knocked like they owned my house. They didn't knock like normal people. They knocked like they already owned my house. Three heavy, synchronized bangs that rattled the glass panels beside my front door and sent my dog into a frenzy. I remember glancing at the clock. 6:42 a.m., too early for deliveries, too aggressive for neighbors, and definitely not how law enforcement usually announces themselves. When I opened the door, I wasn't greeted by local police. I was staring at three men in black, tactical-style shirts with bold, white lettering across their chests. HOA police. Behind them sat a black SUV with cheap aftermarket, red and blue lights flickering. In the windshield, like a bad movie prop, one of the men stepped forward, chin raised, voice rehearsed. "Sir, you are being detained for multiple violations of Silver Creek Estates community regulations." For a split second, I genuinely thought this was a prank. Or police? That's not a thing. But they weren't smiling. And standing just behind them, arms folded with a smug, victorious expression, was none other than Karen Whitmore, president of the HOA and self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood. She gave me that look, the one that says, "I finally got you." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the badge clipped quietly to my belt wasn't decorative. I'm a federal agent, and the last thing fake authority should ever do is try to arrest the wrong person. But I didn't say that, not yet. Instead, I leaned casually against my doorframe and asked the simplest question possible. "Under what authority?" The tallest of the three fake officers pulled out a laminated card. Not metal, not official, laminated. He began reading from it like a nervous high schooler giving a presentation. Article 4, subsection C, gives the HOA Enforcement Division the right to detain residents pending compliance review. Detain residents. Let that sink in. Karen's lips curled slightly as neighbors' curtains started shifting across the street. Phones were already appearing in windows. She had an audience. That was the whole point. She wanted humiliation, public submission. She wanted to make an example out of me because I refused to remove a boat from my own driveway. A boat that was fully within city code, by the way. But this was escalation. I stepped forward slowly, just enough to shift the tone. "So you're impersonating law enforcement over a parking dispute?" That's when the mood flickered, just slightly. The guy on the right adjusted his stance. The one holding the laminated authority card swallowed. Karen cut in quickly, her voice sharp. "You've ignored 5 violation notices. You think you're above the community rules." Above the rules? No, Karen. Just above fake ones. The irony was almost painful, because at that exact moment, sitting inside my home office, were active case files involving fraud and impersonation to federal authority, crimes that carry very real prison time. And here I was, barefoot on my own porch, being detained by 3 men who bought tactical shirts online. The flashing lights from their SUV reflected off my windows, creating this ridiculous illusion of legitimacy. A show, a performance. But they had made one critical mistake. They escalated into criminal territory. And now, this wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. This was federal. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I reached slowly toward my belt, and Karen's confident smile finally started to fade. You might want to rethink this. The second my hand moved toward my belt, all 3 of them tensed. Not like trained officers, like men who suddenly realized they might have miscalculated. The tallest one barked, "Sir, keep your hands where we can see them." His voice cracked at the end, just slightly. Enough for me to hear it, enough for me to know he wasn't used to real confrontation. Across the street, a curtain snapped fully open. 2 neighbors stepped onto their porch, pretending to water plants. Phones were definitely recording now. Karen stood there, arms folded, chin high, feeding off the attention like this was the finale she'd been planning for months. I kept my movement slow, calm, deliberate. "You're detaining me," I said evenly. "So I assume you've verified your authority with the county sheriff's office." Silence. A flicker of doubt passed between the 3 men. That's when I unclipped it. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough. The gold edge caught the morning sunlight first, then the seal. Then the words, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I didn't shove it in their faces. I didn't raise my voice. I simply held it at chest level and watched. The shift was instant. The guy on the right actually took half a step back. The laminated card reader lowered his arm, slowly like someone powering down a malfunctioning robot. Even the fake flashing lights in their SUV suddenly looked pathetic. Karen blinked. Once, twice. Oh, please, she scoffed too quickly. Anyone can buy a badge online. That comment? That one told me everything. Because real law enforcement doesn't question authenticity like that. They know what a credential looks like. They know what federal identification feels like when it lands in a situation. So I reached into my pocket and produced the second piece, the credential wallet. Flipped it open. Photograph, signature, serial. And then I did something that completely shattered the illusion. I stepped off my porch. Now we were face to face on the driveway. You said I'm being detained, I said quietly. So go ahead. None of them moved. Cars had slowed at the end of the street. A jogger had stopped entirely. Someone whispered, "Is that real FBI?" Karen's confidence started cracking at the edges. "This isn't about that," she snapped. "This is about community order. You can't just intimidate people because you have a fancy title." Intimidate. They showed up with fake lights. They used the word detained. They wore shirts that literally said HOA police. I tilted my head slightly. You're impersonating law enforcement. You're attempting unlawful detention, and you're doing it on camera. That's when the tallest one turned his head toward Karen, not toward me, toward her. And in that tiny movement, the entire power dynamic flipped. Because suddenly it wasn't three men enforcing HOA rules. It was three men realizing they might be accessories to a crime. The SUV lights flicked off. Not by command, by panic. Karen noticed. Her jaw tightened. "This is harassment," she tried again. But her voice had lost that razor edge from earlier. I slid my badge back into place calmly. "You have exactly one chance," I said. Voice low enough that only they could hear clearly. "Walk away. Right now. Before this becomes something you can't undo." For a long second, nobody breathed. And then a distant siren echoed faintly from 2 streets over. Not theirs. Real ones. And Karen's face went completely pale. "Those aren't our sirens. At first, I thought it might just pass. Sometimes sirens echo through neighborhoods and disappear into the distance. But these didn't fade. They got louder, closer. And the 3 men standing in front of me knew it. You can tell when someone's confidence collapses in real time. Their shoulders lose structure. Their breathing changes. Their eyes start scanning for exits instead of dominance. The tallest one turned toward their SUV like he was calculating whether getting inside and driving off would make things better or infinitely worse. Karen noticed it too. "Why are you looking nervous?" She snapped at them under her breath. "You're authorized." Authorized. That word again. The sirens turned onto our street. This time there was no mistaking it. 2 marked county sheriff vehicles rolled slowly into Silver Creek Estates. Lights flashing but controlled. Professional, official. Nothing. Like the discount strobe kit flickering. Inside the HOA SUV, neighbors were fully outside now. Phones raised. Whispers spreading. "This is insane!" "Is that the HOA? I told you Karen would go too far one day." The first patrol car stopped directly behind the HOA SUV, boxing it in without theatrics. The second positioned slightly behind me, not aggressively, but protectively. Interesting detail. 2 deputies stepped out, calm, hands resting near their belts, eyes assessing everything in seconds. One of them recognized me immediately, not personally, but professionally. That subtle nod law enforcement gives when credentials check out without needing a scene. "Morning," he said evenly. "We got a call about someone attempting to detain a federal officer." Silence. Absolute silence. And then something happened that I'll never forget. The man wearing the HOA police shirt slowly started taking it off. Right there, on my driveway, like if he removed the costume, the situation would reset. The deputy's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Sir, keep the shirt on." A couple neighbors actually laughed, quietly, but loud enough. Karen stepped forward. trying to regain control of a narrative that had already slipped out of her hands. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We were conducting a compliance enforcement action. He's been violating—" The deputy cut her off gently but firmly. "Ma'am, HOAs do not have arrest authority, and they definitely don't conduct detainments." That word again. Detainments. It hung in the air like a bad decision written in permanent ink. The second deputy walked toward the HOA SUV, glancing inside at the light setup. "Aftermarket emergency lights?" he asked casually. The laminated card guy tried to speak. "We weren't impersonating. It's just community enforcement branding." Branding? On tactical shirts, with fake lights, to arrest someone. On camera? I watched Karen's posture finally collapse. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just smaller. For the first time since this started, she looked uncertain. The deputy turned back toward me. "Sir, do you wish to press charges?" And there it was. The moment the entire street leaned in. Because this wasn't an HOA fine anymore. This wasn't about a boat in a driveway. This was criminal impersonation, attempted unlawful detention, potential conspiracy. Karen's eyes locked onto mine. No smug smile now, no folded arms. Just calculation, fear, and the dawning realization that power. Games feel very different when the other person actually has authority. The neighborhood was silent enough to hear birds again. I looked at the three men, then at the SUV, then at Karen, and I said the one sentence that made her knees almost buckle. "Let's talk about how this escalated." Not no, not yes, something worse. Because now it was going to be documented. This isn't an HOA issue anymore. "Let's talk about how this escalated." The street went dead quiet after I said it. Not dramatic silence, not movie silence, real silence. The kind where people suddenly realize they're witnessing something that's about to have consequences. One of the deputies pulled out a small notepad. The other positioned himself near the HOA SUV, documenting the light setup with his body cam angled carefully. Procedure. That word alone changes everything. Karen tried to recover first. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said quickly, forcing a thin smile. "Our HOA bylaws allow enforcement action. We've issued multiple notices regarding visual violations and—" "Visual violations," the deputy interrupted calmly. "The boat," she snapped. "It lowers property values." Across the street, someone actually muttered, "Oh my God." I stayed quiet. When people are panicking, silence makes them fill the space with mistakes. The deputy turned slightly toward the three men. "Who instructed you to detain him?" There it was. Not why you detained him. Who instructed you? The laminated card guy swallowed hard. "We were told the board approved escalation." "Which board members?" the deputy asked. All three of them glanced at Karen. Not subtly, not carefully, directly. And that was the crack. Because up until this moment, Karen had been the orchestrator, the confident president, the authority voice, but now the liability spotlight was shifting. "I did not authorize anything illegal," she said sharply. "We were enforcing community compliance." "With emergency-style lighting?" the deputy asked. "With uniforms that say police?" the other added. Her composure thinned further. "It's symbolic," she insisted. "It's a deterrent. A deterrent." That word hit differently when spoken in front of actual law enforcement. The deputy scribbled something down. Then he looked at me. "Sir, did they verbally state you were being detained?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "Multiple times." "And did they block your exit?" I glanced toward the SUV positioned directly at the end of my driveway earlier. "Yes." Another note written down. Karen's breathing was visible now, shallow, faster. "You're twisting this," she said, her voice losing its polish. "He's intimidating the board because of his position. He thinks he's untouchable." Untouchable? I finally stepped forward again, not aggressively, just clearly. "I've ignored violation letters because city code overrides HOA preference. That's a civil disagreement. Showing up with fake law enforcement branding crosses into criminal territory." The deputy nodded slightly. That nod was small but devastating. Because now this wasn't neighborhood drama. This was documentation for a report. And reports move upward. The second deputy finished inspecting the SUV lights. These are wired to the ignition. That's intentional. Intentional. Another heavy word. Karen's confidence was gone now, completely replaced with defensive frustration. You can't seriously be considering charges over a boat dispute, she said. And that's when the first deputy delivered the sentence that shifted everything permanently. Ma'am, this stopped being about a boat the second someone said the word detained. Behind us, neighbors weren't even pretending anymore. Phones were fully raised. Someone whispered, "She's done." The three men in black shirts looked like employees, realizing their manager just walked them into a lawsuit. One of them quietly asked, "Are we in trouble?" The deputy didn't answer him directly. Instead, he looked at Karen. "Ma'am, we're going to need a copy of your HOA enforcement policies and the names of everyone who approved today's action." That's when her face changed. Not anger, not embarrassment, fear. Because paperwork creates trails, and trails create accountability. For the first time all morning, Karen had no script, no prepared speech, no laminated authority card, just consequences forming in real time. And I could see it in her eyes. She finally understood something very simple. Power borrowed from intimidation collapses the second real authority walks in. And this was just the beginning. Emergency board meeting. By sunset, Silver Creek Estates wasn't whispering anymore. It was buzzing. Group chats were exploding. Doorbell camera clips were being shared. Someone had already slowed down the moment the deputy said, "This stopped being about a boat," and posted it with dramatic captions. And at exactly 7:30 p.m., an emergency HOA board meeting was called. Not scheduled, not announced in advance. Emergency, which ironically violated their own 72-hour notice rule. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Because when people panic, they leak information faster than broken pipes. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. The same place where Karen once fined a retired couple $200 for holiday decoration. Excess. Now the parking lot was full. Not just board members, residents. Curiosity is powerful. Curiosity is powerful. Accountability is even more powerful. Inside, from what I was later told, Karen opened with damage control. "This is a targeted attack," she began. He escalated intentionally. He embarrassed this community. Embarrassed the community. Interesting framing. Not "we may have overstepped." Not "we made a mistake." Blame redirection. Classic. But here's what she didn't expect. One of the quieter board members, a guy named Tom, who usually nodded along to everything, cleared his throat. "We approved enforcement," Tom said carefully. "We didn't approve detainment." The room shifted. Karen stiffened. Detainment was procedural language. Procedural language. As if vocabulary could undo body cam footage. Another board member, Linda, spoke up next. "Did you consult an attorney before authorizing uniforms?" Silence. That question lingered longer than the others, because the answer was obvious. No. Karen's control started unraveling in layers. "The uniforms were symbolic," she repeated. But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. That's when someone from the audience, not even a board member, stood up. "A resident. Did you really send men to arrest someone over a boat?" Not confrontational, just stunned. Karen's voice sharpened. "It's about maintaining standards." And that was the moment the energy flipped completely, because the residents weren't thinking about standards anymore. They were thinking about liability, about association dues, about being named in a lawsuit because their HOA president decided to cosplay law enforcement. Tom leaned forward. "Are we personally exposed here?" There it was. Self-preservation. The true motivator. Karen tried to regain command. "There are no charges filed." Yet, she didn't say that part, but everyone felt it. Meanwhile, outside that clubhouse, deputies had already requested documentation, policies, approval records, communication logs. Paper trails don't care about tone. They care about timestamps. And Karen had left plenty. Emails marked escalate. Messages saying, "make an example." Even one that read, "He needs to learn he's not above us." Above us. Not above the law. Above us. There's a difference. By the end of that emergency meeting, something unprecedented happened. A motion was introduced, not about enforcement, not about my boat, about Karen's position as president. The word temporary suspension entered the conversation, and that's when witnesses say her composure cracked completely. "This is betrayal," she said. But it wasn't betrayal. It was survival. Because suddenly, the board realized something Karen hadn't. This wasn't neighbor drama anymore. This was potential criminal investigation territory. And nobody wanted to go down with the captain of a sinking ego ship. Back at my house, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered. It was one of the deputies. "Just giving you a heads up," he said. "We're forwarding documentation to the county attorney for review." Review, which means someone higher up gets to decide what impersonating authority and unlawful detention looks like on paper. I thanked him calmly and hung up. Across the street, Karen's house lights were still on well past midnight. For the first time since I moved into Silver Creek Estates, she wasn't watching my driveway. She was watching her future unravel. And the real fallout hadn't even started yet when it left the neighborhood. By Monday morning, it officially stopped being neighborhood gossip. It became a case number. The county attorney's office doesn't move loudly. It moves quietly. No flashing lights, no dramatic statements. Just emails, calls, document requests, and one very important phrase. Pending review of impersonation and unlawful detention elements. Elements, plural, which means they weren't looking at just one mistake. They were examining the pattern, the uniforms, the vehicle lights, the verbal declaration of detainment, the board approval trail. And once something leaves HOA territory and enters county legal review, the tone changes completely. Because HOAs operate on bylaws, counties operate on statutes, and statutes don't care about property values. By midday, 2 more deputies had returned to collect digital communication records from the HOA's management, office, laptops, meeting minutes, internal email chains. Residents noticed. Of course they did. Silver Creek Estates had never seen law enforcement step inside the clubhouse for anything other than a lost pet flyer. Now evidence was being catalogued, and that's when the media sniffed it. Not national news, not yet, but a local reporter caught wind of HOA impersonation, incident involving federal officer. That headline alone was gasoline. Karen tried one final move, damage control at scale. She sent out a community-wide email titled, "Clarification regarding recent misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. That word did a lot of heavy lifting. In the email, she reframed everything, claimed the HOA compliance unit was a neighborhood safety initiative, claimed no real arrest was intended, claimed the situation was exaggerated by outside influence. Outside influence, meaning me. But here's the problem with rewriting history. Video exists, multiple angles, multiple witnesses, and once something is recorded, narrative control evaporates. Within an hour of her email, residents started replying all, which is always a mistake, unless you're exposing something. One homeowner wrote, "You said detained." I heard it clearly. Another replied, "Why were there emergency-style lights if this wasn't meant to intimidate?" Then someone attached screenshots of prior HOA messages where Karen wrote, "We need stronger enforcement optics." Optics. That word destroyed her defense. Because optics implies performance, and performance implies intent. By evening, the board called another closed-door meeting, this time without Karen leading it. That detail spread fast. Another replied, "Why were there emergency-style lights if this wasn't meant to intimidate?" Then someone attached screenshots of prior HOA messages where Karen wrote, "We need stronger enforcement optics." Optics. That word destroyed her defense. Because optics implies performance, and performance implies intent. By evening, the board called another closed-door meeting, this time without Karen leading it. That detail spread fast. When power shifts, it doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges the seating chart. Tom, the quiet board member, was now acting chair. Karen wasn't suspended yet, but she wasn't in control anymore either, and that psychological fall, that's worse than any fine. Meanwhile, I received a formal request to provide a written statement. Not as a threat, as procedure. Clean, clinical, documented. The deputy who first arrived at my house added one final comment before leaving that afternoon. Cases like this don't usually end the way people expect. That sentence stayed with me because he wasn't talking about jail necessarily. He was talking about consequences. Civil liability, resignations, insurance investigations, personal financial exposure. HOAs carry insurance, but insurance companies don't like intentional acts. And showing up with fake authority branding? That starts looking intentional very quickly. By nightfall, Karen's house was dark. No porch light. No late-night pacing behind the blinds. Just stillness. But stillness doesn't mean safety. It means calculation. Because when someone who thrives on control loses it publicly, they don't just accept defeat. They plan, and something told me Karen wasn't done. She was cornered. And cornered authority is the most unpredictable kind. Her last play. Cornered people don't retreat quietly. They make one last move. Karen made hers on Wednesday. A certified letter showed up in my mailbox. Thick envelope. Official letterhead stamped urgent. Not from the county, not from law enforcement, from a private attorney. Subject line: notice of intent to pursue civil action for harassment and abuse of authority. I actually smiled, because this wasn't strength. It was panic dressed as confidence. The letter claimed I had intimidated HOA, representatives using federal status. Claimed I had damaged the reputation of the association. Claimed emotional distress from the same group that showed up at 6:42 a.m. to detain me with fake police branding. Bold strategy. But here's what Karen didn't understand. When you send a legal threat, you open a legal door, and doors swing both ways. By noon, the county attorney's office had already scheduled formal interviews with the 3 HOA police volunteers. Not casual chats, recorded statements, separate rooms, separate timelines. And here's where pressure does its real work. Stories started changing. The tallest one said he assumed the board had cleared everything with legal counsel. The laminated card guy admitted the word detained was rehearsed beforehand. Rehearsed. That word hit like a hammer. Because rehearsed means planned, and planned means intent. Meanwhile, insurance investigators contacted the HOA management company asking one very direct question. Was law enforcement impersonation authorized by the board? Insurance language is cold, precise, unforgiving. If the answer is yes, coverage can evaporate. If the answer is no, individuals become personally exposed. Suddenly, this wasn't about me anymore. It was about who would carry financial risk. That's when the board fractured completely. Tom called for an internal vote of no confidence. Not privately, formally. Documented. Karen tried to fight it. You're abandoning leadership under pressure, she argued. No, Tom replied, steady for once. We're protecting the community. Protecting the community. The same phrase she had used to justify fake uniforms. Only now, it meant protecting the neighborhood from her. By Friday evening, residents received another email. Short, blunt, effective immediately. Karen Whitmore has stepped down as HOA president pending legal review. Stepped down, not resigned, not removed. Language matters. But the power was gone, completely. And then came the final blow. The county attorney declined to press criminal charges, insufficient. Public harm threshold, but referred the case for civil liability review and issued a formal written warning regarding impersonation statutes. That might sound small. It wasn't, because a written warning becomes a permanent record. And in civil court, records speak loudly. Karen's attorney withdrew the harassment claim within 24 hours. No explanation, just silence. Because pursuing it would mean discovery, depositions, subpoenas, every email, every message. Every make an example of him line dragged into daylight. And Karen, for all her flaws, understood one thing. Control is impossible once everything becomes public record. By the end of the week, something subtle but powerful had changed in Silver Creek Estates. Neighbors who once feared violation letters started questioning fines. Board meetings became transparent. Language became careful. And the words HOA police disappeared overnight. Shirts, decals, everything. As if they'd never existed. But I'll never forget the look on Karen's face that morning. Not when the sirens arrived, not when the deputies questioned her. The real moment she knew she'd lost was when the men she armed with fake authority looked at her for answers, and she didn't have any. Because borrowed power collapses. Every time. And once it does, it never fully comes back. The quiet after the fall. You'd think the story ended when Karen stepped down. It didn't. That was just the loud part. The real consequences came quietly. At first, nothing dramatic happened. No moving trucks, no shouting matches, no public apology, just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than confrontation. For years, Karen had walked this neighborhood like she owned it, clipboard in hand, posture rigid, scanning lawns like a compliance drone. People adjusted behavior when they saw her coming. Garage doors closed a little faster. Decorations disappeared a little sooner. But now when she walked outside, conversations didn't stop. They continued. That's a different kind of message. No one waved. No one smiled. No one asked about the next board meeting. Parents who once tolerated her community enforcement. Talks suddenly avoided eye contact at the mailbox cluster. Even the retirees she used to lecture about trash bin placement barely acknowledged her presence. Power doesn't just disappear, it reverses. And reversal is disorienting. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I saw her standing at the edge of her driveway holding a stack of old HOA violation notices, not delivering them, just holding them, like relics from a time when they meant something. The neighborhood had changed tone completely. Board meetings were now recorded and uploaded. Enforcement letters were reviewed by legal counsel before being sent. The phrase detainment protocol vanished from every internal document. Transparency replaced intimidation. And ironically, property values didn't drop. The boat stayed in my driveway. Perfectly legal, perfectly still. But the most unexpected shift wasn't administrative. It was social. A few residents began quietly sharing their own stories. Fines they paid without question. Warnings they received for minor things. Moments they felt pressured but stayed silent to avoid conflict. Sharon hadn't just overstepped once. She had built a pattern. And patterns only become visible when someone finally resists. About a month later, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. No dramatic announcement, just a sign. Some said it was coincidence. A planned move, downsizing. Maybe, but timing tells its own story. During the final open house weekend, foot traffic was steady. Curious neighbors walked through with polite smiles. Word travels fast in contained communities. And reputations? They travel faster. I never spoke to her again directly. Didn't need to. The system handled what ego couldn't. The last time I saw her, she was loading the back of an SUV, a normal one. No lights. And for a split second, our eyes met across the street. There was no anger there, no defiance, just exhaustion. Because maintaining false authority is tiring, especially after it collapses publicly. When she drove away, no one clapped, no one celebrated, but the air felt different. Lighter. And here's the part no one admits about situations like this. It was never about a boat. It was about control. And once a neighborhood realizes control can be challenged, it never fully goes back to blind compliance. Silver Creek Estates didn't become perfect. It became aware. And awareness is far more powerful than intimidation. But the story still wasn't finished. Because consequences don't always land where you expect them. Sometimes they circle back. Ripples you didn't see coming. Months passed. The streets of Silver Creek Estates returned to their quiet rhythm. But the ripples of that morning never fully settled. The HOA board, once a predictable machine of intimidation, now hesitated before sending any notice. They double-checked bylaws, consulted legal advisors, and most importantly, documented everything. Residents noticed the difference immediately. No more surprise letters. No more overreaching compliance. Inspections. The community had learned to speak up, to question, to demand proof before submission. And then there was Karen. She moved, yes, but her shadow lingered in whispered conversations. Remember the HOA police incident? Someone would murmur at the mailbox. Can you believe she thought she could detain a federal agent? Even new residents eventually learned the story, piecing it together from recordings and neighbors' recollections. Reputation, once built on fear, had transformed into a cautionary tale. And the best part, The people she tried to intimidate weren't bitter. They were smarter, stronger, united. But the ripple didn't stop there. Local news picked up a small follow-up article about HOA enforcement overreach, citing Silver Creek Estates as an example. Suddenly, neighboring communities began reviewing their own board's authority, questioning enforcement powers and rewriting policies. Karen's one overreach had triggered a regional awakening. An entire network of HOAs was now being held accountable, not by lawyers alone, but by residents demanding transparency. And the HOA volunteers who had shown up that morning in black tactical shirts. Their credibility was shot. One quietly resigned. Another switched neighborhoods. The third attempted to explain his actions at a board meeting, but no one listened. The lesson was clear. Anyone who borrows authority for performance faces real consequences. And when those consequences hit publicly, the fallout spreads faster than anyone anticipates. Then came the subtle twist. One of the neighbors, who had been silent for months, started documenting other HOA abuses using hidden cameras and timestamps. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't personal. It was strategic. The tools that Karen and her board once wielded for intimidation were now being mirrored to enforce accountability. I received an anonymous message one afternoon, a full digital archive of HOA communications, showing patterns of overreach and self-interest. A silent warning to the new board: transparency always wins. Karen, despite moving, couldn't escape. Social media threads continued referencing her infamous morning. The story became a parable for suburban communities, shared quietly among residents, cited during board elections, and used as a cautionary tale in HOA workshops. The boat in my driveway became symbolic, a small victory in the face of unchecked authority. It wasn't about the boat, but about the principle, the precedent. And yet the final irony? Karen's attempt at intimidation had inadvertently created a more vigilant, empowered and connected neighborhood. Silver Creek Estates was now more democratic, more careful, and more resilient. What started as a petty power struggle had transformed into a case study in consequences, authority, and accountability. By the end of the year, I realized the most significant change wasn't legal or procedural, it was cultural. Residents no longer feared the HOA president. They respected rules, yes, but they questioned overreach. They knew someone was watching, someone empowered to challenge missteps, and that vigilance became the neighborhood's silent safeguard. The last lesson: power borrowed from intimidation is temporary. Power built on accountability lasts. Karen learned that the hard way, and the ripple effects she triggered, they'd echo through Silver Creek Estates for years. The last lesson. Standing on my driveway one quiet evening, I watched Silver Creek Estates settle into a calm it hadn't known in years. The sun was low, casting long shadows across neatly kept lawns. Children laughing as they chased balls down the street. Neighbors chatting over fences, but the energy had shifted. It wasn't tension. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. People moved differently now. They questioned letters, reviewed policies, and held authority accountable. The neighborhood had learned that compliance doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from clarity, fairness, and transparency. And Karen? She had vanished from the daily rhythm. Her influence, once palpable and oppressive, had become a cautionary tale. Yet her actions left an indelible mark. What she had attempted to control through fear had instead sparked vigilance, resilience, and unity. The board's overreach, once tolerated, now faced scrutiny at every turn. Every homeowner had a voice. Every decision was recorded. Every misstep documented. The community had turned its greatest threat into its strongest. Safeguard, the boat in my driveway, remained a silent symbol of persistence, legality, and standing firm. But the real victory wasn't property. It wasn't legal authority. It was the transformation of the neighborhood's culture. The residents had discovered a truth far stronger than any HOA mandate. Accountability is unstoppable when combined with courage and collective awareness. And somewhere in the distance, I knew Karen understood it too, not with acceptance, but with the quiet realization that power misused leaves a trail and history never forgets. People would tell this story for years. The day the HOA tried to play police and failed spectacularly. And while I didn't need recognition, I watched as the street changed before my eyes, finally free from fear, finally awake. The lesson was simple yet profound. When authority is challenged with truth, preparation and calm resolve, borrowed power collapses. And the neighborhoods, the people, the communities, those are the real victors. As the sun dipped below the rooftops and the evening lights flickered on, I leaned back against my truck, took a deep breath and smiled quietly. Chaos had passed. Order had returned. Not imposed, but earned. And in that earned calm, Silver Creek Estates would never forget the day fear lost to accountability.